Hello and welcome to this Building Trust in Trying Times webinar. I'm your host, Jamie Dillon. I'm absolutely excited about today's topic, which touches on why diversity, inclusivity, and equality in the workplace is good for your business. I'm going to introduce you to our expert speaker in just a moment, but before I do, let me touch on just a few bits of information for those of you who are new to this webinar series. This series of webinars are hosted live for BBB accredited businesses. Those are businesses who have taken a pledge to uphold 8 standards of trust, to act with integrity, and to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. These webinars are also made available on our YouTube channel, so you can check back a little bit later today if there's anything that you want to revisit, or you can go and pass that on to friends and colleagues if you think that this information will be valuable to them. You'll be able to find the link to that YouTube channel in just a bit. In the chat box, which can be accessed by selecting the chat button at the bottom of your screen. While you're looking for that chat button, take a look too for the Q&A button. During today's presentation, which I'll tell you about in just a minute, you'll have an opportunity to ask your questions. Simply load them in that Q&A box at any time, and we'll reserve the last 10 minutes or so to field them. While you're in the Q&A box, don't hesitate to look at the other questions that are being asked. You have the ability to like them, so give them a thumbs up or an upvote if those are questions you believe are relevant to you. And what we'll do is we will order those questions when we ask them to Regina. We'll order those in the order that receives the most upvotes. So, and with that, I'd like to introduce you to Regina Lawless. Regina is the Global Director of Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion at Micron Technology. Prior to Micron, Regina held roles in talent management, organizational development, and as an executive coach for high potential diverse leaders. Regina holds a master's degree in organization development from University of San Francisco. She has 15 years experience in various HR roles across 4 industries: retail, airline, banking, and technology. And with that, I'm going to pass the floor to you, Regina. Welcome.
Thank you, Jamie, for that warm welcome. And hello to everyone out there. I'm really excited to join today and talk about diversity, equality, and inclusion. So let me go ahead and share my presentation and try to get this in a mode hopefully everyone can see. So let's see, I've been having some technical difficulties here today, but
I can see it, Regina.
You can see it. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Okay, so I wanted to start by grounding us in the definition of diversity, equality, and inclusion. You'll sometimes hear it abbreviated as DEI, and the E can stand for either equality or equity. So I'd like to break down what both of those mean. Micron, as a corporation, we use the term equality. We see that as an aspiration of ours, whereas other companies use the term equity. So let's look at what these terms mean. So diversity, simply put, describes individual differences. So I have a slide upcoming where you'll see what I mean by that and how each of us has unique aspects of our identity that makes us diverse or different from one another. Equality means equal in rights and opportunity. So when you're looking at trying to make the workplace or make your company a place where everyone has the same types of opportunities, that is equality. You are aspiring to have people have that equal access. Equity is a little bit different. Equity means that you're giving various levels of support based on specific needs or abilities. So equity takes into account that not everybody is starting from the same place. There are some great cartoons on the internet that illustrate the difference between equality and equity. So if you think about, capable or people with disabilities, for example. If you were to give someone with a wheelchair or someone who needed wheelchair access, for example, if you were to give access by making your building accessible by stairs, that would be equality. That is giving everyone the same access that other people have. Whereas equity would be making sure that there's a wheelchair ramp or some other way that people who are differently able can have that same access. So equity is about trying to level the playing field. And it's necessary to apply both. And again, that's why Micron, we like equality because it's that aspirational state, but we also do apply equity with the programs that we provide for women leaders, for example. We do things to try to help advantage people who historically may not have had those same opportunities. And then inclusion, this is becoming more and more a topic for companies. Inclusion is the act of belonging, or the act of embracing everyone regardless of their background. So think about diversity as the individual people, whereas inclusion is, do those people feel as if they're embraced for who they are? And really, you need inclusion for diversity to be effective. And what I mean by that, you can have a group of diverse individuals that you've hired, but if they're not included, if they're not able to speak up and made to feel comfortable to bring their authentic background and perspectives, then you're not going to harness the power of that diversity. So inclusion is critical in this space. And similarly, belonging. You'll hear sometimes those two used interchangeably. They're very much linked, inclusion and belonging. Okay, so let's dive in a little further. So I mentioned we would talk a little bit about diversity. So what I like to point out is that diversity goes beyond the naked eye. So oftentimes when we see people, there are some observable forms of difference, right? We can tell someone's race most times, depending whether they're physically abled. You may be able to tell their gender or approximate their age, but there's so much more to us as individuals that you can't see, that are below that waterline. You can't tell by looking at someone what their beliefs are, what their talents, their education, sexual orientation, religion, all of the different rich perspectives that they bring. So it's important to understand that diversity, again, is not one-dimensional. It's not just gender or race. It's all of these other things that make us unique. And as you kind of think about how to apply diversity in your organization or your company, it's important to realize this, to take a broader lens as you're looking to recognize and include people's various perspectives. Okay, so why does diversity matter? So I get this question often: why are we spending time on these DEI initiatives? Shouldn't we just be focusing on work? Well, the answer is this is about work. So diversity increases productivity among a number of other business outcomes. So there is a huge amount of research out there that talks about the benefits of diversity, but it's summed up in this statement below, that having a wide range of backgrounds, people with different experiences and opinions, it gives teams access to more tools when they're trying to solve a problem or complete a task, which in turn drives results. So, if you have someone who has a they have a degree in computer science, they are highly technical. If you pair them with another person who may be more artistic minded, chances are those people are looking at that problem from different vantage points, and they're going to apply different heuristics or mental shortcuts. They're going to bring different bodies of knowledge to bear. They may have grown up differently and can share a perspective of what that's like, or how this particular problem would impact a different community that you may not be familiar with. So that diverse range of experiences and opinions really does help bring more to bear when you're trying to go about and accomplish your task. And I want to share some other really interesting stats. And a lot of these are based on research of larger organizations. But if you have a small company, know that these same principles apply. So one research study by Clover Pop found that gender and geographically diverse teams make higher quality decisions 87% of the time. So that's that factor I was just telling you about, how when you bring those different diverse thinking styles, diverse perspectives, how you get better outcomes. You get better decisions. So the other study here by Harvard Business Review found that team members or teams with a member who shared a customer's ethnicity are 152% likelier than another team to understand that client. So that's another thing that businesses are taking into account, especially as companies are looking to scale globally. We are, of course, a global economy. And if you're looking to break into global markets or even markets within your own city, there's going to be an opportunity to perhaps tap into other customer bases that you don't have today. And having someone on your team who is a member of that community or familiar with how, the needs and the wants and desires of that customer can help you better serve that customer. And then the third one here, diverse and inclusive organizations are 83% more likely to develop innovative solutions. So again, using those different perspectives, you're going to come up with ideas that one person or two people, or even a group of people who are very homogenous, would likely not think of. So really important to add in those different perspectives. And then the last stat here, 2/3 of individuals say a diverse workforce is an important factor when selecting a company to work for. So this data comes from Glassdoor, and this is critical. And one thing to note, this is increasingly important for millennials and Gen Y. They are growing up in an era where they are used to more diversity in general. They are asking and demanding of employers, and they're demanding this by either not taking a job or leaving a job. They're demanding to work for places that are inclusive and that value differences, value flexibility. So even generational diversity, right? So understanding that, someone from a millennial generation may think about things differently, may work differently than your baby boomer generation. So just important to keep that in mind as you look to staff your business, that it's this diversity is a diversity as a value is really important when it comes to attracting and retaining talent, ever increasingly. Okay, so you may be wondering, how does diversity lift performance? And we talked talked a little bit about it already. It really does have to do with, first and foremost, raising the team's intelligence. So by having these diverse perspectives and viewpoints, you increase the social intelligence of the group. So think about the wisdom of the crowd, right? So more people with different perspectives, you're by virtue smarter because you're tapping into more resources, more repositories of information than you would have had yourself. And then it also reduces mindless conformity, but that is only when we apply, inclusive behaviors, or the principles of inclusion like we talked about before. So if you have people with different perspectives and they're enabled to speak up and speak out, then they're going to challenge and be able to help you kind of think of things from different perspectives. So that helps to prevent you getting locked into groupthink and just coming up with the same solutions. And then multiple perspectives improves problem solving and creativity. So there's a lot of interesting case studies out there about this piece. So one that I read not too long ago that I thought was pretty interesting. There was a tech company that was making a facial recognition software that could account for you wearing a mask, because of course in the time of coronavirus we're all for the most part wearing masks or being exposed to that. And so this particular software, it was able to recognize men wearing a mask, but it couldn't recognize females wearing the mask. It picked it up as them having a scarf on or some other type of accessory. So I thought that was an interesting example to show how if that team had some female engineers or had tested it out even, which eventually they did because that's how they found out this particular glitch, but it was by broadening out and realizing that there was a gap that was missing. So diversity can help with before you even get to that stage by incorporating some of those perspectives in the problem solving or the ideation phase. Okay, so let's talk about developing a DEI strategy. So I know that can seem overwhelming because you are trying to run a business and there's a lot that you have to contend with to do that. And DEI can seem very overwhelming, especially in the current context where there's so much going on in the space of racial equity. And of course, we're dealing with coronavirus and so many different things. So I want to give you a simple lens to think about diversity that you can apply. So really, there's many things that you can do to come up with your diversity roadmap, but there's really 4 that I think are critical to long-term success. So, and I'll talk about these in a little bit more detail, but just to quickly go through, first and foremost, you want to start with your business strategy. So whatever your company is focused on achieving, if you are a sales organization, if you're retail, if you're tech, agriculture, whatever your industry is, you want to look at that strategy and think about, so for example, if you're a retail store, if as a retail store, and I've worked in retail, it's all about customer service. It is all about making sure that that customer that walks into your store or your restaurant, that they feel that they've gotten the best service so that you can have repeat customers. So if customer service is at the crux of your strategy, then you can start to look at, well, how does DEI play into that? So if customer service is at the forefront, then DEI has 2 natural places it fits in the customers that you attract. So having a strategy where you have a broad set of employees, that in turn will help you to attract a broad set of customers. So that can be one pillar in your DEI strategy, that I need to have my employee base reflect my customer base. So shared language is the next one. So this is super hard to do for large companies. I think smaller companies have an advantage in this space because you're talking to your team, more organically. You're interacting more frequently a lot of times. But shared language is really about determining how you as a company want to talk about diversity. What are those shared concepts that are important to you? So for us at Micron, one of the things that we talk about, our shared language around diversity, is that diversity is more than one dimension. So that's something that we're trying to socialize within our organization, so that people realize that when we talk about diversity, we don't just mean women, we don't just mean people of color, we mean really all of us has some aspect of diversity. So having that shared language helps kind of get people on the same page and get people really able to help move your initiatives forward, because they realize, oh, okay, when I'm hiring someone and you're saying that I need to look for diversity, it's not just, oh, I'm not just looking for women, I'm looking for, a variety of different backgrounds potentially. So that shared language is helpful. Behaviors. So we can have the best of intent. We all know that knowledge is fantastic, but knowledge does not equal outcomes. You have to actually change your behavior. We all know that to lose weight, you have to eat less calories and exercise more. Just because we know that doesn't mean we actually do it. So this is where the rubber meets the road with DEI. It's figuring out those specific behaviors that you can train and hold your team accountable for and reward them for. A simple, actually, I'll hold that. I have some examples on the next slide. And then systems, this is really about process. So I don't mean systems in the form of like computer systems, although that can play into this if you have some technical aspects of your process. But this is looking at holistically how your business runs and trying to embed DEI into those elements. So, I'll give you a deeper example on the next slide, but think about how you recruit people, how you promote people, how you reward people. So every business starts to have these touch points that is part of their process or their system, their broader system of how they operate. That's where you want to look at coming up with a DEI strategy as well. So let's look at some examples here. So for business strategy, I gave you an example earlier about linking it to your customer strategy. Some companies, it's, like I mentioned, it's innovation. For tech companies, you see that commonly, that they will link the business case for DEI to the need to attract more, broader, innovative talent to solve problems. Some companies approach it as a customer or as a CSR initiative. They look at it as, from a social responsibility standpoint and being more socially, socially equitable. So depending on what, really what your company's mission is and what your strategy is, that's how you want to link in DEI, because you don't want it to be just a standalone thing that you do and you don't want it to become a strategy that just, or initiative that sits on the shelf. So with shared language, I talked a little bit about educating the workforce on, or you can use your, take the time to educate your workforce on different language. So in this example, if you have a larger team, you may bring someone in like myself to do a training and help people understand what unconscious bias is, for example. And so that's something that a lot of companies do as a starting point, because if you're not aware that there is a thing called unconscious bias or what those biases are, it's hard for you then to actually change your behavior. So shared language is a really good place to start, to educate your team members on what does diversity mean, what is inclusion, what does that mean to our company. So develop, just like you would with culture, just like companies, Disney does a phenomenal job of culture building. They call their employees cast members, so language is powerful in shaping culture. So apply those same principles that you would on a building culture around customer service or innovation. You can do that same thing in this space. And then behaviors, I mentioned, this is ultimately what, where you have to get to. It's not enough to just have a training on unconscious bias and call it a day. This is where a lot of companies get tripped up, that they focus exclusively on awareness and don't take the time to figure out how to actually embed these principles into how people behave. So the example here is around internal promotions. Again, this is applicable to larger companies that tend to have a formalized process for how they assess talent. If you're in a situation like that, you can apply what we would call inclusion advocates or inclusion champions. Insert those people into the process and have them help look for and call out potential bias when you're talking about talent and when you're assessing people for promotion. For a smaller organization, or if you are even a sole proprietor, this gets a little more challenging, but you yourself can still come up with behaviors related to this. So you can think about, okay, before I make a hiring decision for my team, I am going to look at resumes from a variety of people, including at least 2 candidates from underrepresented groups. Or I am going to contract with vendors who are minority women business owners. I'm going to, partner with them. So there are still things as a small business, as you're partnering in the community, as you're reaching out to maybe contract with vendors, even customers. You may make it a point that, I'm going to try to engage some different customers, some different communities, understand how my business can be of service to them. So you yourself can put some behaviors into practice. And then systems, again, is about the overall processes in your business. So keeping with the theme of interviewing, a lot of larger organizations now are deploying artificial intelligence. They're using AI software to blind candidates' names or schools until the interview stage, because there is, substantial research that is, often where bias creeps in. People associate different or have different stereotypes based on people's names. There was a study that showed, exact same resume that was sent, one with a more, traditionally white sounding name, one with a more, stereotypically Black sounding name, same resume, but the one with the Black name got far fewer callbacks. So the name itself can elicit some bias. So just think about, as an organization, you cannot get rid of bias. It is human nature. So that's why it's important to embed it in the system, because you cannot stop you or I from having stereotypes, from making snap judgments. That is how our brains are wired. that's how we're wired to process the information that we get every day. So you can't leave it to human beings, because humans will be humans. So you can try to, help yourself and your team be more aware. That's where the shared language, you can try to help adopt more behaviors. But if you really want to instill lasting change, you build it into the systems and put some of these objective measures in to help people help themselves. So let's talk about, and I'm happy to answer some more questions, but as I wrap up here, I wanted to leave you with a few key takeaways to think about. So diversity includes many dimensions beyond what we see. I hope that the iceberg that I showed you earlier illustrated that. And you can also kind of look online. I think Deloitte has a diversity wheel. So there's a lot of graphics out there that you can use to kind of further understand this space. Secondly, diversity and inclusion drives business impact. So there is a plethora of studies out there that look at the various ways it drives impact, but mostly it's about that ability to problem solve, decision make, and drive productivity. And then last but not least, for real impact, DEI strategies really should be aligned to your business primarily. Step one, build on that shared language with your team. Focus on changing behavior, not just awareness. And as we just talked about, take a systems approach. Really do embed it in the way you operate to overcome that natural human bias or biases that we all have. So with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Jamie for questions.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Regina. I really, and I mentioned this to you before, right before we kicked off, I'm just so grateful that you're taking this time today. I know that you are so busy, and we're just really grateful that you were able to impart your wisdom. We do have a few questions, so I know we're running a little bit over. We did have a few technical issues that kind of gave us a little bit of a late start, but if you have a few more minutes, Regina, would you field just a few for us?
I do. I would love that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So I have a question from Keola Allen. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. What's the difference between race and ethnicity?
Ooh, that's a great question. I actually just was teaching about this earlier this morning. So race is how someone is identified based on their, typically it's their physical attributes. So think of race as, first of all, it's a social construct. And it was based on trying to categorize people by attributes like their skin color, for example. So race is Black, white, that is race. Ethnicity is how people tend to identify themselves. So race, think of people were categorized into different races based on attributes. Ethnicity tends to be tied to your nationality or language. So ethnicity would be, if you identify as Jamaican, for example, or you're Sicilian. So think about, ethnicity as where you come from or the language you speak. Hispanic is another good example of ethnicity.
Thank you. Thank you. Roseanne asks, if your company or board is not diverse, what are some best practices for recruiting for diversity?
Ooh, great question. So a lot of companies are deploying a lot of different methods. So larger companies are sometimes able to hire search firms that specialize in diversity. So you can do that to try to find talent in specific pools or hire search firms that specialize, that already have connections with diverse talent. The other thing that you're seeing companies do, and this originated in sports, they're doing what's called the Rooney Rule. So you see that companies are now requiring that there be at least one diverse candidate in the slate of candidates. And interesting study that Harvard Business Review did, it really is important to have more than just one. So they found in their research that statistically, if you only have one woman in your final panel, statistically, she has no shot of being hired. So you really need to have at least two. And the reason for that, when there's just one diverse person, they stand out more. And that actually triggers our unconscious bias of seeing that person as different or other. But if you throw more diversity into the pool, that person gets normalized amongst the group. So I would say look for, have your recruiters or work with recruiters who are specialized in diverse talent, diversify your sourcing where you're looking for talent. And also try to put practices in place where you require a certain number of qualified, right? You have to make sure that you're not lowering or changing any standards, but open up your slate, require some diverse, qualified candidates in that slate, and they're more likely to progress to that offer stage.
Excellent, excellent advice. Thank you so much. Jordan asks, when many businesses are just trying to follow state guidelines and stay open these days, where do you prioritize creating and implementing a DEI strategy?
So such a good question and a timely question, right? It's a balancing act as a business, right? You certainly have to look at prioritizing how you stay afloat, because if you don't focus on that, you may not have a business. But I would argue that really DEI is and should be a part of how you operate. Because again, if you're approaching it by making sure you have diverse perspectives on your team, there's somebody on your team that can come up with that idea that you haven't thought of that can help you pivot your business to weather this storm. So I think a lot of businesses do think of it as an add-on, but I would encourage you to really think about it fundamentally with your strategy, like we talked about. So I would say it's important to do, if you do it holistically like that, it doesn't become an ad, it becomes just part of how you're planning your business.
Got you. Not mutually exclusive, I think is what you're
Right.
hearing there. So I have two more questions. Do you want to hang on for two more?
Yeah, I sure can.
Thank you so much. So Ben asks, are there some timelines associated with these strategies? How long should I expect it to take for these to take hold in my business?
Oh, great question. Diversity and inclusion takes time. So if you think about a typical culture change, when I was helping organizations with culture initiatives, we often would say that it can take 2 or 3 years to really embed culture change, because it takes really getting people used to doing these behaviors over and over again until they become a habit. Now that's if you're talking about a major transformational culture change of, maybe you've gotten some indications that your team is not as inclusive. That would take, perhaps a year or more to really see the results of kind of concerted effort to change the culture. But if you have a more targeted strategy, like trying to diversify your leadership team, for example, that could be something that you do quicker, because as you have new openings, as you have attrition, you can always look to backfill with different, diverse talent. So it really depends on if you're doing the tactical elements of hiring, and what your scope is. If you're trying to really move the needle, like some companies are realizing that they have, 10-15% of their leadership team is women. That's going to take time. I know some of the larger companies have a goal by 2025 to be at parity to the market with underrepresented minorities. So a big audacious goal like that takes time, but you can definitely do some smaller things in the 3 to 6 month time frame to start getting some quick wins.
Thank you. I think that that's a great response and is really valuable, even for someone like me, where patience is not my virtue. And so really remembering, and reminding um, us to give ourselves a little bit of permission to develop this and to have a reasonable pace. So I appreciate that. I have
It's a
one more question.
marathon. Sorry, I think it's a marathon, not a sprint. That's for
Right,
sure.
right. Okay, one more question from Kenneth. I'm going to tell you exactly as he says it, and then I'm going to tell you what I think he's asking too, just so we can be clear. Kenneth, hopefully we're serving you well here. As a small business, how do I access the lady-owned businesses or the applicants from unserved employee groups? So what I'm guessing he's saying is if he's having to choose a vendor, right, or if he's trying to choose a B2B strategic relationship, what kind of diligence can you do to make sure or see if you are accessing a minority owned business or a business owned by a woman?
It's a great question. So yeah, that's a fantastic question. There are different associations. So I was just talking to a friend and a colleague of mine around, she just got certified as a woman-owned business. So that is a specific certification. An association that both certifies women-owned businesses, but also has a directory of those businesses. So I would encourage you to look, even starting with the Better Business Bureau of Idaho. I'm sure there's, female business owners within this group, but also looking online for some of those women or other diverse business organizations. And then in terms of diversifying your applicant pool, two things to keep in mind. One that I mentioned earlier is around sourcing. So think about where you're posting your jobs, for example. And I know for small businesses, a lot of times you may be using Craigslist or, just kind of posting on Indeed or whatever, job board. But I would encourage you to look. There are a lot of niche and specialty job boards. Even if you're posting jobs at Boise State, for example, if you're looking for college students, within the universities, there's always diverse student groups. So that's something to tap into, or looking at diverse institutions. So if you can kind of find out which universities, all of the universities kind of post their demographics. So I partner, I'm on the board for the engineering college for University of San Francisco. They have a prevalence of women at their college, and then their engineering program has about 40% women enrolled in the program, which is higher than most engineering programs. So looking for places where you're going to have that diverse talent. And then the other thing I would say is how you write your job posting. There is language that you can use that turns off diverse applicants. So for example, women, there was a study that showed that women tend to underestimate their ability. So if you have a job posting that says these 10 things are required, the studies show that women are more likely to say, well, I can only do those 4, so I'm not going to apply. Whereas when they did the same, they showed the same job description to men may only be able to do that 4 as well, but they tend to think, oh, well, I can, I have the potential to grow into this, so I'm just going to throw my hat in the ring. So just be mindful too of how you write your job descriptions. If you're saying that I need a go-getter that's able to work 24/7, that might turn off people with a family or, so just that also, just be mindful. Your job posting could be, can either attract different people or could be turning people away.
Great, thank you so much. So that wraps up our questions. Regina Lawless, Global Director of Diversity, Equality, and Inclusion at Micron Technology. Sincerest thanks. on behalf of Better Business Bureau and all of the people that we serve each day, we are so grateful that you took this time with us today, and we will see you soon.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.